from? Is your
It'll be on my page or Fantasy and Frames. So you can retweet on Fantasy and Frames right now. My page and my John McGlynn 75 page. So you can retweet it there. Everybody, here we go. We are talking. We had the quarterbacks earlier with Aaron Soslowski, Colin Tammany helped us out with some running backs. We got a tight end guy now. Coop A Fiasco, Andrew Cooper with JT here with me, talking about some tight ends. Now, this tight ends are not just a four horse race. There's, as you can see, last couple of years, there's been a couple tight ends just popping up that are surprising everybody. It's going to be a trend that this year people may not think it's a deep class. It's not just one guy. It's more than a one horse race. So we got the guy right guy here to talk about it. So, Coop, tell everybody where you can find you at, what you got going on in the fantasy football world, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Twitter right here at Coop A Fiasco. All my content lives on Fantasy Alarm these days, full time over there. So you can check that all out. I'm finishing up. I just said I was going to write an article on every single team for free agency, what I think is going to happen, contracts, the whole deal. I'm 29 teams in, John. Ooh. So 30 more to go. But obviously, as I'm doing that, I'm up to speed on the prospects, all that. But yeah, so I'm finishing that up, and then we're going right into what everybody wants. The Dynasty stuff, the rookie draft, all that. So check that out. That's on Fantasy Alarm. But yeah, I mean, this is I just want to say when it comes to tight ends, the best classes all time we're talking maybe 3 or 4 serviceable guys, right? There's 2 different flavors of like great tight end classes. There's ones that have 2 really good tight ends. So we're talking like Zach Ertz and Kelsey in the same class, or Jimmy Graham and Gronk, right? So those, you could say those are the best ones. Or you have sometimes there's like 3 or 4 guys at most, but we're usually talking like, the George Kittle class, where it's like the guys that are fantasy relevant besides him aren't, there's Ingram, and then it's like Gesicki, Hayden. So you don't really have ones where there's, a ton of guys. Like if the class from last year, if all these guys hit and they're all good, Musgrave, Mayer, Laporta, Kincaid, that would be considered the best fantasy tight end class of all time.
Yeah, it's super impressive. Super impressive. Toronto Dave, what's up, brother? This guy's on every show. Every time I go somewhere, Toronto Dave chimes in. Awesome. Toronto Dave, thanks for chiming in here, man. Thanks for joining us. So JT was at the combine, but he was sitting in the seats, having a good time, eating some popcorn, some beers with the family, kind of stuff like that. But who do you think the media day? Which tight ends do you think had the best media day interactions with the press?
Yeah, I checked that. I checked out a lot of the interviews. I talked to some people I know, and the thing with that is that in the interviews with the actual coaches, they want to know who knows what, and in the media, they just want to see how you handle yourself. And from what I heard and what I saw, Trey Knox, and it helps that he has a communications degree, right? And he wants to get into broadcasting. But you just see the way he talks about, he was serious when he was supposed to be serious. He could joke around when they wanted to joke around. He's talking about Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, right? And Dustin in the chat, he was at the combine. He was one of the people that mentioned Trey Knox to me, specifically, how cool he was with the LeBron's, the Jordan LeBron stuff. And he was able to articulate himself. Whereas, some other guys out there, not to point fingers, but Dustin and a couple people mentioned that Cade Stover was a little cagey, didn't respond well to some questions that were kind of half jokes. Like somebody brought up Michigan. He's an Ohio State guy, and he didn't respond well to that. So I kind of like to see who knows how to handle themselves and who can have a little patience in talking to strangers in a kind of a bright light situation,
There's your boy right there, Dustin Lodke, jumping in, saying, my guys. Dustin, I texted you. Dustin's not too far from my house either. I texted him. I said, hey, good job on the questions. Good job on everything. You did a good job at the combine. Nice work as usual. So, nice seeing him. Nice hearing all this stuff.
Sure.
So we said, who ran the fastest 40 time? We've already tipped on that a little bit, but who's your boy?
I mean, Devin Culp ran the fastest 40, and and we'll get into this, I'm sure. But with guys like that, the question is, can he be an every down tight end? Because he is kind of a converted wide receiver, right? So you look at it and you're like, okay, he ran a 4.47, right? And then some people look at Johnny Wilson, who's a wide receiver who's 6'7", weighs the same as Devin Culp, and they say, okay, well, what's the difference between these two guys? Why is Devin Culp going to get the slot snaps and be that guy? So he did run the fastest 40. Nobody else really ran like a number that I love. But yeah, I mean, 447 is great. I mean, that honestly, that's up there in terms of the best all time. Like Evan Engram, as far
Yeah.
as like guys that carried on 442, right? But then you got Kyle Pitts 449. It's a pro day adjusted, but like that's up there, man. George Kittle 452. Chigakonkwo, Noah Fant 4.5 ranges. So 447 is cooking.
Yeah, Johnny Wilson was not a big fan of that question about
He
moving.
did not like that, no. Which
so
honestly, the thing is, people were like saying, "Oh, you shouldn't ask that" or whatever. Like Florida State guys were like, "That's offensive" or whatever. Here's the thing: people asked Elijah Higgins that last year, a wide receiver out of Stanford, and he said, "Yeah, you know what? Teams talk to me about playing tight end, and I'll do whatever it takes to make a team." And now he's in the tight end room for the Arizona Cardinals, and he has a job. So, it depends how you want to take those questions. I know Johnny Wilson wants to be a wide receiver, but in my opinion, if I was an agent, what I would say is, yeah, I want to play wide receiver, but I'll do whatever it takes to help this team. That's the answer. That is, it feels like it's too easy to give that answer. No, instead of saying no, I'm not going to play tight ends.
Yeah, and it's there's a little bit of a pay difference here. I guess it's kind of a lot of a pay difference. And people want to make the money. It's you're not. This isn't your life. This is a couple of years of being in the NFL. It's nothing's guaranteed. So they want to make as much money as they possibly can in a short window. Which I agree with that 100%. But man, just to get in the league is such just to be in the NFL itself. I would do everything possible, scratching every wall, opening every door possible to try and get in here. But
here's the thing: is that the rookie contract, it isn't position dependent, right? Now, if you say I want to play wide receiver, but I'm willing to play tight end, maybe that moves you up around, and then you're actually getting paid more money. What you do over the next 4 years, whether you convert to tight end or not, that is going to be determined down the road. That's why, to me, it's something where it's like, yeah, whatever you need me to do, I'll play a punter, whatever you need me to do. That's the answer I would give, just because it's like, hey, look at Matthew Slater. He said, I'll do whatever you want. He was in the league for 16 years.
Yeah, don't put yourself behind the 8 ball just trying to make more money right now. Yeah, exactly, 100%. Who ran the slowest 40?
So of the guys that actually tested, it was Dallin Holker, which that disappointed me a little bit because that was a guy that went out and had a great final year, and 700 plus yards. For me, I just want to see guys run. Like there's 3 kind of levels of speed for these guys. There's difference making speed, which is like 4.5 and better. Then there's the high 4.5s, 4.6s is get it done range. And then there's 4.7 plus where you really need to be peppered with targets. If you even look at a guy like Zach Ertz, who ran a 4.74, he only had one 1,000 yard season. At 28 years old, he needed 150 targets to get there. That little extra bit of speed in terms of average depth of target, getting downfield, yards after the catch, it does matter at a certain level. So that's why for me, I love to see guys run at least a 4.6 and ideally sub 4.6.
Yeah. JT, you coach football, you played football. I played left tackle my whole life all the way through college. I always really, really loved having a tight end on my side, a double team. How important is pass blocking and chipping and run blocking and down at the line and downfield? You get the second level with the linebacker and a safety, the red zone separation. You can be big, but you got to be fast too. You got to run decent routes. It's not all about just who's blocking. You see George Kittle can do it all. The handful of these guys that Gronkowski, Ertz, all these guys. Kelsey, they're all good blockers and they're good also route runners, good separators, good everything. Being mobile in every phase of the game. Also, how important is size in the NFL? Or is it just about how good of an athlete you are, or how good of a football player you are?
Yeah, it just depends on what does the team want you to do. I always laugh at high school. I played running back, but whenever we went 2 tight end sets, I actually played the second tight end. And not because I was that big of a guy. I played the second tight end because I could block. And so they would put me on the line to be that extra blocker, but then they also could send me out on passes. So I think that some of these guys are going to be really good blockers. They're going to be able to maul guys. They're going to be able to really help on those double teams. And some of these guys are going to be like, I'm going to give you a chip. I'm going to give you what I can, but they're not going to be able to handle some of these blocking situations. So it really depends on what a team's asking guys to do, and then making sure they're asking guys to do stuff they can actually do. So the big one I always get, and the one that drives me mad as a football fan when I watch them is when they have guys, tight ends, block back down on plays and they take on DNs that they have no business blocking, that they're not going to block them. It's not going to happen. You're saying you should get them, but it almost never works. And then that's when you're like, okay, guys, this 235 guy isn't taking out the DN on this team. He's just not going to make that block. So why do you keep having him run that block? So again, if you have a team that's how you want your tight end to block that DN a lot, you want a bigger tight end. You got to get a guy that's 260. You can't be throwing out a 235-pound receiving tight end and then having make that block to that's basically the most important block on the run, and have that guy doing it and just getting beat every time. And so those are the ones that drive me nuts. Like if that's what you want to do and those are plays, okay, or have that guy help chip. But if you're leading him one-on-one on a stud D end week after week, you're probably losing. You're getting your running back killed most of the times. But that's what you got to figure out what you need. And I think the biggest issue, I think combine-wise, I'll say here, some of the guys that have good combines or look good for certain things in the combine, they maybe don't translate to fantasy success. Right. So it's like, oh, I like that guy. He's going to be a really good NFL tight end. Is he ever going to catch more than 35 passes in a season? Some of these guys probably not, but can they start in the league for 10 years? Technically, could they be a Durham Smythe? Who's technically a starter, but he's on everybody's waiver wire because like they don't throw the ball to the tight end in Miami. It's just the way it is. So there's some of these guys I like real life. I was like, I'd take them on my team. Am I going to take them for fantasy purposes? Probably not. So that's where you have to kind of find the difference, I think, a little more at this position than other positions on what is actually good in a guy that's going to make a team and be a fairly high draft pick and a guy who is going to be fantasy relevant. And this is why I always bring up Brenton Strange last year from Penn State. So second round pick. No one saw second round pick coming, but everybody liked his size, his speed, the way he blocked. But with Evan Ingram, you're like, he's never going to see the ball. He's going to be a second block. He's going to be a sixth lineman, basically, almost all the time. And maybe he gets a dump off here and there. Is he a good player? Yes. But is he going to be a good fantasy player? No. And is he ever going to be? Yeah, who knows?
And I'm shocked how many people still like those guys in fantasy. Like you see, I saw with Drew Sample when he went in the second round too. And that's our job to identify who's going to be those guys and who's not, right? And so you have the different layers where it's like on one side, these guys are going to be blocking tight ends. We want them out. On the other side, though, as you mentioned, you have the guys that could end up being part-time guys. Like Mike Gesicki did exactly what you described last year in the game against the Raiders. They asked him to even just chip on Max Crosby and ended up being a game-ending safety, right? Yeah. So it's like you have to find out who is going to be on the field enough to be fantasy relevant. And what I find is that in the 250 weight range, that's where you have guys that can be true two-way tight ends. It doesn't 260 ideal for blocking, but George Kittle's 250, Dallas Goedert is in that range too, like 250 to 260. Then you could be a two-way tight end. If you weigh less than that, you have to prove to your team that you are one of the best pass catchers on the team flat out, and you need to be on the field every single play. Otherwise, if you weigh like 235, the number that Justin threw out there, I think that's the perfect number because that's exactly how much Cameron Brate weighs, right? Like that's how you end up being that tweener, that Cameron Brate, Anthony Ferkser, Kylan Granson type player who can catch, but they're not better blockers than a Jelani Woods or Mo Alley Cox. They're not better pass catchers than a Josh Downs. So what are they? They're just a halftime guys. That's why you really truly need an Evan Ingram where they say, man, this guy is the best slot. He's the best slot receiver on the team. He can block better than the slot receivers, which is a plus for him. And that's why he had the fourth most receptions of any player in the league last year, is that he was a full-time player. So when you get – and the thing is, I would rather draft those guys than a lot of the chunky guys. Like I'll take a shot on one of those guys. I've got lots of Kylan Granson, whatever, just to see. But just know that the floor is that they're just going to be middle of the pack, whereas, some of these other guys will be blockers. And there's a big – ideally, you have a guy that just plays wide receiver every play like Mark Andrews. That's the ideal spot. But the next best is somebody that's playing every snap. We'll take a Dallas Goedert. we'll take a Jake Ferguson, even if they play in line and block or whatever, as long as they're out there every play.
I got an extra left tackle called Darnell Washington. It's number 30 on every roster I have. At one point in time, when he blows up, he'll be my fantasy gold, man.
I'll tell you, those guys. So Darnell Washington, he fits in the pure, like when you look at like the best blocking tight ends. Since I've been watching football, the best blocking tight end is Mercedes Lewis, right? Mercedes Lewis had a brief period with the Jaguars where he was kind of a 2A tight end catching some balls. When he finally was like, I'm just going to be a blocking tight end, you know what he did with the Packers? He went out and bulked up to 275 pounds. So 6'6", 275, man, which the pass catching went out the window, but now that guy is gotten contracts until he's 40 years old because it's a valuable spot. So Darnell Washington, at a certain point, he's going to have to decide whether he's going to be 6'7", because right now he's 6'7", 266 or something like that. If he's going to be 6'7", 280 and just be like an extra offensive lineman, or if he's going to try and slim down and be a Kyle Pitts or something like that, which according to some of the guys I've talked to, like Brandon Huffman, there have been people all along the way saying, hey, your meal ticket is offensive line. So we'll have to see with a guy like that. But I mean, the way he can move for his size is crazy.
It scares me a little bit because Brock Bowers is a really good downfield blocker, but I've seen him take on some bigger players on the defensive line and, trying to pick up blitzes and getting rolled. So, I mean, not that it scares me because he's going to be a generational talent, so he's going to be a good player, I'm sure. But I mean, it's just in the tea leaves how good the guy is. You can see, I mean, his film is absolutely fantastic. But I think he needs to be, he's a little bit undersized for someone that's got to take on defensive ends and stuff, in that position.
The best case scenario for him is if he gets drafted to a team where you look and you say, okay, they already have an inline tight end. He's not going to have to do that, right? Like if my number one landing spot for him is the Chargers release Mike Williams and draft him, and which they would draft at 5, which would be good for the draft capital. But if they release Mike Williams is the second highest cap hit of any player right now. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams have the 2 highest wide receiver cap hits, 1 and 2. Right. And Mike Williams just tore his ACL. They release Mike Williams and draft Brock Bowers, and they have Donald Parham as the big goon inline tight end. Now he's just free to play wide receiver. Now he's free to be Mark Andrews, who plays 85% of his snaps at wide receiver. Now we're talking this guy should be coming off the board in rookie drafts right after Marvin Harrison Jr. in the league neighbors.
Yeah, think of like Dalton Kincaid and Dalton Knox kind of situation. Exactly those kind of things where you got a receiver. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I get it. Who's got the best hands in this class? Who do you think is the best receiver that runs route, but who's going to get the ball every time that you want to throw the ball to him?
So I was looking through some of the questions here, and we gotta upgrade this from easy mode to hard mode. So I'm going to say that you cannot. I'm not going to pick Brock Bowers for any of the answers here, right? Is that fair? Because I think Brock Bowers
is probably the answer for to be honest.
Virtually every question. If you want to talk about the best route runner, the best hands, right? The best, the best escapability, like he's probably the answer for most of them. I will say the guy that I think, in watching had the best hands and also statistically is Ja'Tavion Sanders, man. Like this guy's got fly traps. And he actually on 67 targets, which is top 6 of all tight ends last year in school, he didn't drop a single ball, not one. So his contested catch numbers are good. So Ja'Tavion Sanders to me is a guy that's what's going to, because you look at the stats, you look at the raw talent, that's the difference maker. That's why the people love him on film, is that it doesn't matter if you're on him, it doesn't matter if you're off him, it doesn't matter if the ball is in the wrong spot, like he just gets it.
Yeah, I wonder what you think. I was a little disappointed saw him run a 4.69. I was like, I thought it'd be a little bit faster than that. I was hoping to be a little more athletic. I mean, that was the one thing that kind of burned me on him because I thought everybody was kind of selling him as a super athlete. Now, on the other hand, as a tight end, you see this all the time, and I feel like I always talk about this when I talk about Travis Kelce. But how often are you seeing run direct routes to a certain spot? He's like finding space. He's creating room. He's not like necessarily sprinting to a set spot all the time. And that's where I'm like, Sanders has that feeling of a guy at Texas that kind of found the space where they needed to him, and he kind of got open. And so I'm like, is the 4.69 really going to kill it for me? Because like in a high tight end premium, that's where you start thinking like, hey, do I take him in the beginning of the second? Does he go in the first? Does he drop all the way to the end of the second? I was a little disappointed in that time, but I still think he's the second best tight end in his class, especially fantasy purposes, like you said, just because he does have good hands. He does seem like he's that guy that is big enough. He's not as small. Some of these other catchers, you're really looking at like they're really hurting to push 235. He's actually big enough to actually block as well. So I like him in that position. But I was really hoping he'd get in the low 4.6s, maybe 4.59 in the 40.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like the little cheat code for people, quote unquote, watching film. If you're, because it's like, it's very tough to get into like releases and things like that, and we don't even know what these coaches are looking for on like, sometimes they go, oh man, this guy has everything we like, but his release is bad, but we've coached guys up before, so let's take him. We don't even know that. But I will say this: if you're going through and watching the film, what you want to look for is guys that create for themselves and have the knack. Right. So as you mentioned, like he can find the space, right? He can find those spaces. Also at the end of plays, and there's three guys surrounding a player. Some guys can get 3-4 extra yards just by finding creases, going up and above. George Kittle, go watch his college highlight. He's just like diving and doing cartwheels and just like finding ways. Sam Laporta breaking tackles all over the place. You know what I mean? Just like finding ways to get open and to actually make plays. Versus you go back and watch like a Luke Schoonmaker. You can watch every one of his catches in about 10 minutes because he only had like 40 something. And there's one great catch against Iowa, but everything else is really just like play action where they forget about him, or screens, or like little, you know what I mean? Like things where he's not creating for himself. And a good example for Jatavian Sanders is Zach Ertz. You look at Zach Ertz, to bring it back to him, 6'5", 250, ran a 4.76. So criminally slow, but he was so good at finding separation, and he never dropped the ball, that he was a guy that garnered 150 targets. Just know that with Jatavian Sanders, with him running a 4.7, 4.69, whatever it is, like he needs targets now, because that's the difference between Kyle Pitts as a rookie catching 68 balls and having 1,026 yards versus Jake Ferguson catching 71 balls, catching more balls this past year and having 700 yards. It's that one guy is just bigger and stronger and faster and can do more with the ball in his hands. It's why George Kittle has more 40-plus yard plays than any other tight end that is not close, because he runs a 4.52 at 250 pounds. It's like he can, the big plays are he can actually outrun guys on top of fending people off. Rob Gronkowski had to fist fight people all the way up and down the field. That's why he never had monster. Travis Kelce hasn't had a play longer than 60 yards since like 2016, just because he's not fast, but he can find space. And that's what matters for a guy like Jatavian Sanders. But I'm with you. I'm disappointed, because if he could be that guy and he runs a 4.58, now we're like, well, this guy can do all of it, right?
Mm-hmm. I felt bad for Gronk because towards the end of his career, you could see it looked like he was like going into like battle instead of playing football. He had this strap here and this knee brace and the shoulder straight, and it's like, man, he just got beat up so bad because he did so much.
As a Patriots fan, one of the least athletically pleasing players to watch. You know what I mean? It was crazy that he would just make like a shoestring tackle, a shoestring catch, or like a one-handed snag. Yeah. But it always still looked so clunky, dude. He was just like rambling, man. I love watching the highlights because he's just like leaving people in his wake. But you're right that he was like the Michelin man out there, Yeah. At the end.
How big is RAS score for tight ends? Zach Kuntz got a 10. Cole Turner, we just talked about. I saw you tweet about Cole Turner the other day about his opportunity. I see, he got a 4.87, and we know how good he is when he has his opportunity with the Ravens. How big do you think our relative athletic score is for tight ends?
So the thing with RAS score, first of all, I love anything. Like, I'm a football nerd at heart. You know what I mean? Like, I really enjoy anybody that wants to put in the effort to come up with a score or a number and explain what it is and what the deal with is. And if they can present it to me in an aesthetically pleasing way, like RAS score with the green and the yellow, then I appreciate that. And I love that, dude. I love player profiler. I love all that. I will say that if I'm obviously, it's not my product. If I were in charge of for tight ends, I would just make some minor adjustments to the way the 40 time is weighted. At other positions, 40 time, this might sound crazy, But at other positions, in my opinion, for fantasy football purposes, 40 time is less important than it is at tight end. And you might say, what the heck? How is it not more important than wide receiver and running back? But it's because of those low target, like the low targets that we get for some of these guys. They need to be really efficient. Like if George Kittle was slow, he would, no one would even think about him. Right? But the fact that he can break off big chunk plays and turn a 30-yard play into a 70-yard play, he's the only tight end that has multiple 70-plus yard plays. He has multiple 80-plus yard plays, right? Like that is such a key difference maker that what I would do is I would just crank up the dial for guys that run like a 4.4 or a 4, or low 4.5, and I would dial it back for guys that run in like the 4.6 ranges, which, because you look at it, and it's like, they come out and say this year that, who was it this year that had like the crazy RAS scores? Theo Johnson.
Yeah, my guy.
Theo Johnson. Yep.
And we like Theo Johnson, but when I talk about difference making speed, he ran what? He ran a 4.65. 4.65 at his size is great, but it's not difference making speed where now he's outrunning every linebacker and every safety and every defensive back. Evan Engram can outrun defensive backs. Yeah. George Kittle can outrun virtually most safeties and linebackers. At 4.65, are you outrunning the safeties? No. You're outrunning the linebackers, some of the linebackers, especially the guys that are there for tackling and not so much coverage. You're definitely outrunning the linemen, but are you outrunning any of these other guys? No. So to me, and it's like, is it that much more valuable for getting out front to block? I guess, yeah. I mean, like Trent Williams as a lineman, it's very valuable to his speed that he can get out front to block. But in that score, I just sometimes I think that it's not quite capturing fantasy football as much as it is kind of just like, oh, this guy's a raw athletes, and the thing is, it is just trying to capture raw athletes, like Vernon Davis and obviously incredible and these guys. But I just look at his and I'm like, then Zach Kuntz too. I look at it and I'm like, is he a 10 out of 10 for me athletically? Well, he ran like a 4.6. He ran like a 4.58 or something like that. I think for me, if I'm going to make somebody a 10 out of 10 on my athletic score, he's got to run a 4.4 something, right? Like Vernon Davis ran a 4.38, right? Like he's a 10 out of 10. Kyle Pitts, if I was saying like 9.5 out of 10, Kyle Pitts ran like 4. It's hard for me to look at it and say this guy's a 10 when he ran a 4.6.
Jack Sensen just typed in here. Breaking news: Schultz and the Texans, 3-year, $36 million with 23.5 guaranteed. So
smart.
That's good. It's
smart deal for them, because if they didn't pay him before free agency hit, the Dolphins would have 100%.
Yeah.
Because Justin mentioned it earlier. They value the blocking over the pass catching, which is why they went Smythe over Gesicki. Had Dalton Schultz became available, a guy that just this year played in the same scheme that they run the 49ers, right? D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick brought over that same scheme with the fullback and the 2A tight end. Had he become available, the Dolphins would have 100% snagged him. So smart on them. I think the Dolphins now, their best bet is if they want to upgrade the pass catching from Durham Smythe, either via the draft with like if they're going to do it in free agency, it's Hunter Henry or who, right?
Do they even want to though? Because they don't throw to the tight end at all anyway. So what's it?
I think, well, that's the thing is if they had, I think the ideal configuration of that offense, right, is what's going on with the 49ers, right? You have 2 wide receivers. You have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. That's your Tyreek Hill and your Jalen Waddle. Mm-hmm. And then you have the great running backs. And then you have a fullback, right? The 49ers use Kyle Juszczyk and the Dolphins use Alec Ingold. Once you use that fullback, you're not going to use a full-time third wide receiver. That's why Juwan Jennings and Braxton Berrios are useless. What you ideally would have is a full-time 2-way tight end that can both catch and block. And in that scheme, the blocking is more important, so they chose Smythe. But ideally, you would have George Kittle, who can block and catch. So, like, I think the Dolphins, if they had a 2-way tight end, it might not be ideal for fantasy, but then their offense would be one of the more complete offenses.
Yeah, I was stacking up my Brevin Jordan shares just in case something happened there, but that's kind of a we all knew what was going to happen there. He's not even when he has the opportunity, he doesn't make it anything happen.
He did have that big play in the playoffs, the 70-yard touchdown, and I don't think that's a crazy thought, McGlynn. Not at all, because Schultz could have been gone, man. Because again, was the number one free agent tight end.
Yes, by
In
far.
my opinion, no question. It's him and Hunter Henry probably in a tier of guys that can do everything. And then you've got like Everett, that's not a good blocker, but can catch. Fant, who is not a good blocker and just a pure prospect, right? Type like just chasing athleticism. So not a good free agent class. So, but I was with you. I'm with you that stashing Brevin Jordan wasn't crazy, but now you can kind of let him fly
Punt.
away.
Yeah, Theo Johnson was a guy I was really me and JT been talking about him for months now at this point in time, and JT had mentioned Brevin Spanford also, relevant players who had a kind of a poor RAS score. So these things,
Right.
we'll see how they translate to the NFL as far as that goes. But Theo Johnson, I just think is a good player, with a good RAS score on top of there. That just adds to his draft stock. It's someone I want on my team. I wanted on my team to begin with, first of all, but then this kind of just solidifies things that I already thought that he was a good athlete too. So I guess that's where the RAS score to me, when I already know he's a good player and he has these good testing scores too, that's what solidifies things for me as far as I acknowledge kind of what I was already thinking to begin with.
It's a cherry on top. That's what
Yes.
it is, man. And then some people, you know what? If they're going to get ice cream, they have to have the whipped cream. They have to have the cherry. For me, I'm like JT, where I wait for the draft and I say, okay, how are they going to use this guy? And if you have an Isaiah Likely that is a Zach Ertz type that just plays slot, even with Mark Andrews, he doesn't play in line ever. He played like 80% of his snaps at wide receiver, blocked on less than 2% of his pass plays. I mean, if they're going to use him like that, then I don't care, right? Like if the ball is going to go to him 6-7 times a game, which is all I care about, then yeah, we don't care about that. So to me, the draft is huge for tight end because it gives you that narrative. It tells you who's going to be the Brenton Strange blocking tight end, Darnell Washington going to be the sixth lineman, and it tells you who, the reason I drafted Kylan Granson is that the president of the team, Kevin Rogers, comes out and says, hey, we look at this guy and we see Trey Burton and we want him to be Trey Burton. And I said, you know what, Trey Burton, all right. He was all right for a little bit there. He's at least got a pass catching role, right? So that's how I look and take stabs, man, is I do that. So RAS score, great. If it all comes together, then great. But like, I'm not going to completely fade a guy that goes in the second round to be a pass catching tight end just because, he's had some red on his chart.
Yeah, John, I think there's, like you said, I think there's a big variance in the guys in this draft because of that. So these are the guys I think, like he talked about, the Kylan Granson types. The guys are basically Isaiah Likely, and that's Jaheim Bell and Cade Stover.
Yes. Yep.
To me, those guys, if they land up in a good spot where they use them like that and they're going, hey, we're not having you block back on the defensive end all the time, then I think those guys could be relatively good, but they're not very big. They're 235 and there's not a lot of room on those guys' frame to really add weight. So you're never going to get those guys up, I think, into the mid 250s. They're going to have to play around 235, 240 probably. So I like those guys in the right situation. In the wrong situation, those guys just get buried because they never even see the field because they don't use them that way. Now you go the opposite side of that, which we were just talking about, the guys with the big size, the guys with the good RAS scores. You get a guy like Tip Riemann from Illinois who's 275, 6'7", 275, 993 RAS score, but barely saw any targets in college.
Right.
Like Illinois already wasn't very good at throwing the ball, and then they never looked to him. So is a team going to look and say, oh, we can use him because we're going to use him in this, Smythe role or somewhere? I'm basically going to have this guy block all the time, and if he's open, we'll drop it off to him, but we're really not going to have him run very many pass patterns. He's really going to be a blocker for us. Is that a guy? Is he going to do that? The Hulker, the 40 time is what hurt him because,
dude, so
like
disappointing.
Luke said, he's a guy that was bigger that we thought was going to be a pass catching bigger guy.
Right.
Like, oh, he's the bigger guy who can catch passes, and then when he ran so slow, you're just like, he rose slower than Spanford. And Spanford is just a beast of a human being. Again, he's a 6'7", 6'8", 280 guys. And you're like, oh, man, he ran slower than that guy? Which you almost – I think he makes a roster. But, again, he's going to be a goal line, one target a game type of blocking lineman. So that's where you're going to have to kind of figure out where some of these guys fit in. A Ben Sinnett could be a pass catcher. They threw him the ball at Kansas State a decent amount. Is he going to get that opportunity in the pros wherever he goes? And that's where we're like, oh man, these landing spots are going to be so huge for the tight ends, because it is going to be a guy who, depending on where you see him land, you're going to go, oh, he's just going to be a block for him. Or they're going to be like, oh, that guy is going to be, he might technically be the backup tight end. He might only play 45% of snaps or 50% of snaps, but he's going to run a pass finder every time he's out there.
And we forget like that these guys, their expectations are not the same as ours. Like Tip Ryman and Brevin Spanford, they would love to be Michael Pruitt, right? Like Michael Pruitt's a millionaire, right? Like he's rich, dude. You know what I mean? Like that, like you asked some of these guys that they asked Amir Abdullah if he was going to be James White, and he's like, James White is a gold-plated name in this league. Has almost was a Super Bowl MVP. He's like, I'm just trying to help a team. He's like, let's start there, right? Like some of these guys, you have to sit back and say, okay, like Jaheim Bell, we get really excited because we want to get excited. We want to make somebody our tight end too, right? But Jaheim Bell is basically like, as JT pointed out, he's battling to be Chigakonkwo. He's a slower he's basically slower version of Chigakonkwo, Gerald Everett, much slower version of Evan Ingram. Like that's his goal. If he could be a guy, like for us for fantasy, if he could go to a team where he's the second target on the team and an every down player out of the slot, then he's fantasy relevant. But just think of how difficult that is. Just think of how difficult it is. In all likelihood, we've got Brock Bowers as the number one guy, and then maybe one other guy from here. And it could even be a guy like Eric All that we're not even talking about because he tore his knee up and didn't even get to do the combine, right? So it's like a guy like that out of Iowa, the tight end he's, good behind the scenes numbers, yards per route run, all that. It's like it's so difficult to pick it out. That's why people think that I'm the guy that loads up on tight ends in the drafts, in my rookie drafts, and I almost never, because I'm the guy that ends up just adding them based on what they do. Like most leagues I'm in, it's like Mark Andrews, who was the second tight end drafted on his own team after Hayden Hurst. George Kittle was a 5th round pick. Like we just go and do that. I did draft Evan Ingram because he ran 4.42. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't get Kyle Pitts because I'm too good at this. So I didn't have a high enough pick, but I would have drafted Kyle Pitts if I could too. But like, and Brock Bowers, I will draft too. But for the most part, I'm not going to be the one that goes and drafts the second tight end off the board, because I think in most cases, those guys are overpaid for.
Evan Ingram's like Bitcoin. He started out good, and it's like you just held on and you sold, and now it's like.
I wish I had as much Bitcoin as I have Evan Ingram. Let me tell you, Johnny, dude, he's been my Bitcoin, dude. Yeah, I think last night on the Sirius XM we were doing a contest of like comparing players to movies, and I was like, Evan Ingram is the Fast and Furious franchise. He came out hot with the first one. And then it went bad for a little bit, and he had the one Pro Bowl season in there, which is kind of like his Tokyo Drift. But now that, you get the 5th and 6th movies, you're like, okay, these are actually really decent movies, right? Yeah. So we'll have to see what happens next. But yeah, Evan Ingram, Fast and Furious, baby. Let's go.
My man crush is Tommy Tremble. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I'm a Notre Dame season ticket holder, all that kind of stuff. Like, is there a Tommy Tremble in this draft who's just going to be an NFL stable for years to come, but just never really going to be fantasy relevant?
Tommy Tremble, man, it's like Notre Dame, boom, checklist of like the school that people love guys from. Great name, right? And he also throws a hurdle out there every once in a while, which how are you not going to love a good hurdle, right? He also gets care. Every once in a while he gets a little handoff too.
That's his first touchdown was that. Yeah, he didn't have a receiving touchdown until last year.
Yeah, my comps for him, you wouldn't have liked. But one of them was Chris Cooley, which you might have, right, as like a hybrid fullback type guy. You know what I mean?
H-back,
like a move tight end, H-back. In this class there are some like I'm scared that the guys that are going to end up like that is like a Theo Johnson, where it's like a team looks at him and says, oh, very athletic and the whole deal. And they kind of use him in gimmicky ways, right? He had he had a knack in the red zone. I think he had like 7 touchdowns, something like that.
Yeah.
But they don't look at him and say like, oh, you're going to be our every single down guy. Like you're just going to be like our sneaky weapon. The guy that people don't know is athletic enough. You know what I mean? So I do worry about that from this class. I mean, for me, if I was going to pick a name like that, I wouldn't even pick somebody with the combine. I'd pick like McAllen Castles or something, like a guy that, right? Just like a Senior Bowl. Another one of those guys, 2 235, but he's got there's a little funness to his game,
Who really needed to come to the combine to prove something to everybody?
JT already said it, and he didn't do it, which was Dallin Holker, right? He needed, and he's the one that because 700 yards, right? And you're like for tight end in college in 12 games, 13 games, you're like,
it's a ton. It's a ton.
It's 100 yards, yeah. You know what I mean? So I was like, and plus, he was he also was part of the Colorado State circus, right? So it was like he was on the way more national TV games than he should have been on, right? So I'm watching the games, right? And I'm like, yeah, all right, like who's this guy, right? So then he needed to come out and do a little more than he did, which is a shame that he just the slowness is the problem for me.
Yeah, who helped their position the most by showing up and doing all the drills at the combine? JT, you can start with that one.
Yeah, you can jump in.
Yeah, if you're gonna say, guy just because that maybe wasn't on anybody's radar and maybe still not on anybody's radar fantasy wise, but a guy helped his NFL stock, I think was Tim Ryman from Illinois. I mean, he's just a guy nobody really heard about. Their offense wasn't really explosive, but he came out 9.93 RAS score, was just behind Theo Johnson. Guy showed really good size, agility. That's a guy teams are going to use. Like, even if he's their third tight end, somebody's going to be like, hey, we can use this guy in dim formations, or we can use him as a blocking back all the time. So he's a guy who maybe would have been like, does he even get drafted? To now, I think he does. I think he definitely gets taken. And maybe he gets taken in the fifth round, something like this high as that. I don't see him going way high because, again, he doesn't have much of a receiving profile at all. But somebody's going to like him just for the athletic score, the fact that he's big and can be a second, tight end for you. If the Colts don't take Brock Bowers, which I'll be super disappointed if he gets a 15, they'll take him because I'd love it. If he doesn't, Tim Raymond, he's the type of guy that the Colts always take. Right. They will absolutely take the guy with a super high RAS score that's just big, and they love those tight end RAS score. They will be all over him in like the 5th round. I'm telling you right now.
They're gonna have to league on their roster.
They don't care. They don't care. He loves the RAS scores. He loves those guys. He'll keep adding them to the mix. He loves 6'7", 6'8", 270-pound tight ends that had huge RAS scores.
I think Kylan Granson ends up being a cut candidate here. And if they have Tip, and Tip's going to be inline tight end, because I think what really makes Granson a cut candidate is not that he's not solid at what he does, but I think Will Mallory kind of showed enough that he can do what he did on a cheaper deal, right?
Yep, and you already got Jelani Woods coming back from injury as the big guy. So now you get rid of Mo Alley Cox. You let him go. You got Jelani's your big guy. You go, do we want Mallory or we want Kyron? I think they would probably lean Mallory because he's more athletic and he's a little bigger, and he's probably almost as good as a receiving tight end as Granson. So I think I lean Mallory there too.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Who goes undrafted that should be drafted this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. So that's the thing. You're talking to a fantasy football guy. So the guys that I think should be drafted that might go undrafted are strictly fantasy based. Like, if Tip Raymond doesn't get drafted, I don't care. I care less. You know what I mean? Like, Big Goon doesn't believe in birds, but for which I will give him credit for that answer because he got his name out there, and that is like as long as he's joking, right? Which I think he is, because it is kind of like I've seen like the subreddit like birds aren't real, and it is kind of funny. But like as long as he's actually joking and does believe in birds, then that's a good way to get your name out there. Say something crazy. So shout out. Yeah, I think that a name that might not get drafted is Isaac Rex, right? So Isaac Rex, not at the combine, but and I know we're trying to. Should I give a name from the combine?
Whatever. I've had it.
Okay, yeah. So Isaac Rex is a guy for BYU that he came out, scored a bunch of touchdowns as a freshman, like a ton of touchdowns. I think a record for BYU, and he was good enough to the point that our guy Dallin Holker there actually transferred out. So he was at BYU, transferred over to Colorado State, and Isaac Rex stayed, and now he's going to declare. And he didn't get the invite to the combine, which is kind of disappointing. And now he might not go drafted because now he's just going to have the pro day numbers or whatever. But I think Isaac Rex is a guy that I look at the numbers and I'm like, he should have been invited,
Yeah. JT, how about you?
A guy I think is probably going to get drafted, but depending on landing spot, will not get drafted in fantasy drafts. To me, is Cade Stover. He's a guy that was really solid at Ohio State. He was a nice over the middle guy. He didn't test as well as I thought he would. He didn't have a terrible RAS score. He was 8.33. But usually because the tight end, the way they do the RAS with the height, weight, all that, tight ends tend to score a little higher than on some other positions on just how they kind of weight those things. He's a guy that, I was eyeing, pre-mocks. I was doing some mocks. I was always taking him in like the 4th, 5th round. But he's a guy, if he goes really late or he goes to a bad spot, I could see him just completely getting forgotten in fantasy mock drafts or in even real rookie drafts when they get here. I can see everybody kind of just bailing on Cade Stover. But he's a guy I'm intrigued by. I thought he had a pretty solid season at Ohio State. I watched them a fairly good amount, and he was always a guy that kind of jumped out at me. But man, he ended up being a lot smaller than I thought he would be. I was hoping he would be a little closer to 250, and he was really like 235, and he did not look like he had much room to grow. So that was the one that kind of got me on him, because I just thought the hands, the way he kind of found space across would be interesting. And Jaheim Bell, he's the one guy I'm real interested in, just because athletically, what could somebody do with him? But then the question becomes, like Coop said earlier, does he become a gadget guy for somebody who likes his athleticism, likes the different size, gives him a handoff at the 2-yard line on a tight end reverse ever so often, but he never sees more than 3 targets in a game? But he'll throw in a random touchdown because they'll run a special play for him. That's where I'm like a little worried about him, because I liked what I saw at Florida State. I'm just not sure an NFL team's going to like him enough to get him in the lineup all the time.
Yeah, that's where I fall too, man. That's where I fall. Is I'm going to have a group. I have Brock Bowers is in a tier of his own. Then I'll have a group of guys where I just say, hey, I'm interested. If they go to I need the right draft capital, right? I need the right narrative of the draft, right? Like when I look at it and say, okay, like one thing that people kind of ignore for draft narrative is like, what order did these guys get picked in that have similar skill sets? Like when I watch big, tall split ends and I see Michael Pittman go here and T. Higgins go here, and then 5, like way down, Marvin Mims goes here. I go, Marvin Mims isn't in the same class as these guys. No, not Marvin Mims.
Denzel Mims.
Denzel Mims now is not in the same class with these guys anymore for me. And same thing with like Sam Laporta going ahead of Michael Mayer. I was like, okay, that just confirmed a very important piece of information for me. So with this whole group of guys, I'll look and see, right? And if somebody comes out and takes Eric All as a tight end 2 to a team that needs a pass catching tight end, now I say, hey, you know what? I was rooting for Jaheim Bell, but they took this guy, right? So some people hate that notion, but I personally care what NFL talent evaluators think. I personally do. Some people, I know people love to be the scouts themselves and think they got the system that's better, and maybe they do. Maybe they should be working for NFL teams and because their system is actually better. But I like to take my system and use that as a data point.
What about like a Jared Wiley kind of guy?
Jared Wiley, I mean, I heard he there's another one of those guys that falls in like the Trey Knox category, that he was like very as far as like having a good combine from the sense of his presence was very good. People liked him. They liked talking to him. They thought he was a very smart guy, and he didn't do anything that landed him into a glaring category. You know what I mean? Like he did everything he needed to do, but it would have been nice if he stood out in a way. He just did. To me, as somebody who was not at the combine and was kind of watching the drills, he didn't quite stand out.
Yeah, he just seemed like someone to me that could be like a sleeper, kind of just more of a receiver than inline blocker kind of guy that could be fantasy relevant. So that's more of a fantasy guy than an NFL guy for us.
Which that's what I care about. You know what I mean? That's why I'm like, Jaheim, I don't care if Jaheim Bell doesn't block or whatever. He ran a 4.61, which is nice, and he's 6'3". He's similar size to Chig and Ingram. Yeah, I don't care. I do not care about blocking.
Yeah. What's best landing spot for Brock Bowers? We'll start with you, Coop.
Yeah, so I'd kind of split these guys up into, who's a two-way tight end, who's kind of a move tight end. So for Brock Bowers, like the ideal landing spot, I kind of mentioned it earlier, would be Chargers, release Mike Williams, and then they take him, and then he's basically their second pass catcher right away. But beyond that, I don't care where he goes as long as he has a path to being a top 2 target on the team. But Chargers, that's my dream one is Justin Herbert and no Mike Williams. Oh, that'd be perfect.
JT, how about you? What's your favorite landing spot for Jatavian Sanders?
Oh, so Sanders, I really think he could go into a lot of places. I just think it just depends on how high people want to draft him as far as draft capital. He feels like he should go somewhere in the second round. Now, does that mean middle or end of the second round? Kind of depends on who's kind of sitting there. I think, we like talking about it all the time. We had a little resurgence last year with a really nice tight end class. There's still plenty of teams that need guys. I mean, you look at the Seahawks just got rid of Noah Fant. Where does he land? The Bengals have really needed tight end help. I've seen a lot of people say they think that Bowers goes there. Maybe if he doesn't get to them at 18, he goes at 5 or he goes at 15 to the Colts. For me as a Colts fan, that's just me being selfish. I just want to see Bowers in a Colts uniform because I think he's awesome. I do think the Chargers is an absolutely phenomenal fantasy landing spot. I would love to see him there. But I can see someone like the Bengals going against Sanders like later in the second round. I could see them kind of leaning into that as they've really had a problem getting a tight end and really sticking. They've had all right guys. Guys have been okay. They've been playable, but no one they're really excited about. I could see that happening. I was trying to think of another spot that maybe was tight end that they really could use a tight end. That was kind of my top one. The Panthers, they need some weapons. Does Sanders fall to them? How high is he on their list? They need wideouts. Everybody knows they need wideouts.
Careful with that Tommy Tremble slander, man.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, you got a guy like Tremble, so you already got your blocking guy. Do you go get a Sanders? Maybe do they go get a Jaheim Bell, a guy they think, okay, we can put more in the slot. But I think Sanders, I think that's kind of a decent spot to me. If I'm thinking, I'm like, I could see him hitting up the Bengals somewhere in there. And for fantasy wise, I think that'd be a nice landing spot because it should continue to be a good offense for plenty of time. So I wouldn't hate that one for him.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go Theo Johnson to the Dolphins is what I would want this draft to have.
See, I like it. I think
that would be a good mix. I like that. I think that'd be a good spot for him.
See, I divide because like real life landing spots are different than fantasy.
Sure.
And I kind of split the teams into who needs a 2-way tight end versus who doesn't. And like a lot of if you use 3 wide receivers, you want a 2-way tight end. And the reason being, you don't want the situation where you have to bring in a second blocking tight end, and then you're either taking out your pass catching tight end or you're taking out your slot receiver. So those teams need the 2-way tight end. And if you use a fullback, you need a 2-way tight end too.
Sure.
Because you run into the same problem where it's like now we're rotating the guys all over the place. It just messes the whole thing up. So like Dolphins, Colts, because I love Josh Downs. I don't know about you. So I don't want Josh Downs rotating with a tight end or any tight end.
Yeah. I want him in all the time. Exactly.
Right. If anything, I want Alec Pierce coming out and then coming in for 3 wide receiver sets as the third outside wide receiver.
But God, stop talking about the Colts. JT's going to have to get out. What are you doing there?
But I was saying, Alec Pierce, we were doing our movie. I just said we were doing the movies on the show. And if you're an Alec Pierce fan, you might want to cover your ears. I called him All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, no, JT. You think so that the Richardson and him is going to be just the best combination?
Could be. I mean, on paper, he's big, he's fast. Like,
sure.
He just needs to connect with somebody that can get him those balls. But like, so the Colts, because they have 3 wide receivers, I like. And I do like Alec Pierce. That was a joke. But the Rams, they want to just have one tight end. And now the Saints with his name escapes me. They just brought Clint Kubiak. They just brought him over, right? They're going to want to do something like that, which sucks for Juwan Johnson. Like that's he's just doesn't fit for that. But then for slot tight ends, like you said, like the Commanders with Cliff Kingsbury, Zach Ertz out of the slot, right? Jatavian Sanders could be Zach Ertz for Cliff Kingsbury, and Zach Ertz was playing a ton of slot, and he was averaging 6.5 targets a game for Kingsbury, even after 30 years old. So a spot like that, Bengals, Patriots, Jets. One of the Jets aren't they're going to have trouble getting a second wide receiver. Why not go out and get a pass catching tight end? You'll have Conklin in line and a Gene Bell.
See, I like that. I think the Jets is smart. I think the Jets would be a nice spot for one of these guys.
It's just say, you know what, you're just going to be our big slot and be, Eric Decker or Evan Ingram, and you just stay out there. And we'll use Wilson and one other wide receiver. Wilson, one other wide receiver, and then you got inline tight ends, whatever you want to do, and then you have Gene Bell. That would be perfect. If they told us that's what they wanted to do, I'd move him way up.
Oh yeah, if that was what was happening, we were looking at that. I'm like, all of a sudden, Jaheim Bell's way up in my fantasy drafts. Second round
for sure. Mm-hmm. Which taking a tight end in the second round of rookie drafts is just it's a big leap, man. Laporta, people were worried about it. I was doing it, but like.
I got him in the early third in a couple leagues, and I was stoked about it. And I took Kincaid in some of the same leagues at like end of the first, and then I was like, "Gosh, I would have taken somebody else if I knew I could have got Laporta at the beginning of the third." Yeah, and then you take them both. That's the thing is, I missed. I either have most of the dynasty leagues I have one or the other. But there have been times where I've been said, you know what, everyone else has it wrong. I took Jalen Hurts and Tua in a league in the third round. I was like, you guys are all stupid. I was like, either I'm crazy wrong and I'm wasting capital, or you guys are all wrong. And sometimes that happens. So I don't know. But yeah, with this class, I need to see something, because that's where all the running backs are going to go in the second round, because so many wide receivers. So it's just going to be really tough to pull the trigger on that second tight end. I wouldn't be surprised if Bowers is a first round pick and no tight end goes until the third.
Man, we just had the Fantasy and Frames rookie draft probably I think it was last week. And literally, I think 9 of the 12 spots were running backs. It was littered with running backs.
Second round, yeah, right.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I got a lot of second and third round picks, so I'm kind of happy to hear see those landing spots kind of change. But running backs weren't going until the third round, like a couple months, like a month and a half ago. And now they're all starting to like move back into the second round, and it's good. They're all there's a lot of we'll talk about. We just talked about running backs.
Just talked about tight ends
here, but we get off. I got to stop with the squirrel stuff and stay on task here. But last. Surprise landing spot of a sleeper that we didn't mention yet.
That we didn't so I mean, I pulled guys. I pulled Isaac Rex out. I pulled McAllen Castles. I mean, I guess, dude, a name we haven't mentioned, Mason Taylor. Taylor from LSU, right?
Yeah, these are probably gonna be practice squad fodder at best, as far as that goes. But yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like. If we're talking about fantasy relevant, I think that you have to look at, and we didn't talk about him much. We mentioned him kind of, but like you have to look at Devin Cole and ask yourself, what if somebody wants to just take a shot on the speed? And now we've got a guy that, because he converted wide receiver, right? And he was behind at Washington. He was behind.
All those guys. There's so many wide receivers.
Westover, he was behind Westover and behind a bunch of wide receivers, and they converted him to tight end. It's like, what if people look at it and just say, hey, you know what? This guy's the best bet to just as a raw talent, So I guess that, it's like,
Yeah, JT's been all over Ben Sonata. I've been all over Theo Johnson. So it's kind of, it's nice. So they're a little bit deeper tight ends in this draft class, but it's you know what? Thanks for joining us today, man. This was Wendy says hi. Hi.
Here she is. What up, Wendy? One of my favorites.
Yeah, she's awesome. She did such a good job at the combine interviews and all that stuff like that. It was everything she did. Her videos on the way to and from the combine, at the combine, the questions she asked, and how she asked them to people with her politeness and her happiness and her bubbly, everything about her is awesome. So, but great. Coop, really appreciate you coming on this week, man. Where can everybody find you at one more time on the way out?
Yeah, for sure. Coop A Fiasco on Twitter. And then, I post everything I write over there at Fantasy Alarm. I got shows every Wednesday and Friday at 1:00. The Wednesday show, I have a guest. Friday is usually just a solo show where I just say everything I feel like saying. So that's where you can find my stuff. Check it out, man.
JT.
Yep, you can find me on shows with you all the time. I'm over at JT Orange. You can check out my show, The Stew with JT Brew. All kinds of stuff over there as well.
JT John McGlynn 75 on X. You find the Dynasty evaluation. I do commissioner stuff for Fantrax, and that's just I just opened up my YouTube channel, Dynasty evaluation. So feel free to subscribe to that if you want. But really appreciate you guys. We had some really talented guests today. We got one more. We got wide receivers coming up next. But Coop, thanks for taking some time out of the day to talk tight ends with us. It really means a lot.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me, man. Love Fantasy and Frames. What a crew.
Yes, awesome. We got pretty lucky to land